Central Otago is one place where it's quite easy to forget that New Zealand is a small group of Pacific islands. The plants, the animals, and the people seem well suited to a climate which is more like that of a continent. On the first stage of the journey, I left the east coast and followed the 45th parallel over irrigated plain, rolling downland, and over the first high hills. Here beyond those hills, it was much broader and hotter, more a semi-desert landscape. Again, I began with a detour. I left the road west and climbed to the top of Mount Buster. Well, I just can't work out how they did it. These water races, they're in many parts of Central Otago. They're straight, gradient of about 1 in 500, so they delivered water not too fast or not too slow over great distances. I think some of the longest are about, 120, 130 kilometres. The water for this water race, I understand, comes from below the top of Mount Grayson over there. I guess it's about 10 kilometres in a straight line, but by the time you take into account all the twists and the turns of the valleys and the hills, this water race would be 50 or 60 kilometres long. And it was used to deliver water practically to the top of a hill. And they didn't bring it up here just to drink it either. I had clearly seen the white top of Buster from a distance of 10 kilometres. On a sunny day, the white quartz pebbles shine like a monument, which this area is in a funny sort of way. This entire landscape was created by people who came all the way up this mountain in search of gold. Now, they weren't looking for the elusive mother lode or the quartz reef. They came all the way up here in search of river gold because this used to be a riverbed. All the quartz pebbles down here are river-worn stones. The process of mountain building millions of years ago put the river high and dry on top of a hill. The Buster diggings were the highest in New Zealand, and because of fast-changing weather here, they were probably the most dangerous. So, in the spring, the miners, along with the storekeepers, the innkeepers and various other camp followers, trudged their way all the way to the top of Mount Buster and started work. Well, that was fine, except for those who lost their lives in the unseasonal blizzards that were experienced up here. You've got to be prepared for the conditions up on the top of a mountain. I mean, although it's a sunny day, the wind's quite cold. I mean, it can snow, it can rain, it can blow, all in one day, all the seasons of the year. In fact, by looking at the plants and animals that live up here, you can tell what the conditions are like. A hairy coat is a help to some plants. Others endure by retaining water in the dry white sluicings. But in depressions where it's damp, specialised plants like sundews were eking out an existence. They snare insects on sticky hairs. The landscape is ever-changing. Its changes are as slow as the forming of its rock, or as fleeting as the colour on a hillside as the sun slips behind a cloud. Below Mount Buster, fires, both natural and man-made, have made a land of tussock and shrubs rather than tall trees. In earlier times, many of the hillsides of Central Otago would have had far more manuka cover, and maybe even more matagalri. You hear that sound, the chuka 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 noise? It's the name of a bird, the chuka. Certainly a lot easier to say than Himalayan partridge. They're a game bird that was brought here in the 20s. They're a real corner of the eye bird. Makes them a good hunting proposition. The cursed Madagari is really the chukka's friend. In fact, without it, they mightn't do very well in New Zealand, because they eat its seeds. They nest in under it, in under the base of these prickly plants. Chukka are birds from literally half a world away. They came from the dry hills of northern Turkey. New Zealand became a new home for several game birds. Pheasants and partridge survive with some help, but Californian quail thrive in this dry landscape. Koriki, the native quail, formerly lived here, but became extinct within European times. The climate of Central Otago hardly qualifies as being continental on a world scale. The extremes of heat and cold of the real continents that span latitude 45 north pales the temperature range here into insignificance. Still, it's more than hot enough for me, and I've found few shady trees in place of long-gone forest. The farmhouses with their shelter belts and gardens seem like green oases in the grey-brown desert. At Kyburn, I was given a brief reminder of the rock I'd travelled over in the first part of the journey. The limestone contained 30-million-year-old marine fossils, of similar age to those I'd met back east. If I had to decide on the rock of this part of the journey, it would have to be schist. The low hills of Central Otago are made of schist, and as every miner well knew, the main component of schist is quartz, and that's what they crushed, sluiced, cradled and panned for its gold. The next destination on latitude 45 South was the old gold town of Naseby, which sits high on the shoulder of the mountains I'd come through. In fact, it boasts of being the smallest and highest borough in New Zealand. I think much of Naseby's charm comes not from its elevation, but its many shady trees. It wasn't always so well forested. The gold miners who rushed up here camped on bare hillsides. All their firewood and building timber was brought up here, yet Naseby grew quickly. Within a month it had 4,000 residents, and its main street was a mile long. According to the hospital records, all kinds of illness and injury and nationality were treated here. The goldfields attracted all sorts of people. The problems of instant towns like Naseby must have been enormous. The lure of the gold was enough to make the best of friends fall out badly, and bitter disputes could easily lead to death. It comes as no surprise to learn that New Zealand goldfields were more crime-free and civilized than most. Apparently, if a dispute was brewing, the miners quickly formed a committee to deal with it. Maybe it was here in the goldfields that our passion for committees was born. The Ancient Britain Hotel has a special place in mining history. This was where the first miners' social welfare scheme was established, after several meetings, I'm sure. Well, that's an odd partnership. A model of a mower and the Naseby hearse. As far as I know, mowers were never hitched up to hearses, mainly because one this size would have become extinct about 500 years ago. Then again, maybe it's appropriate that they're side by side. Gravestone spotting in nearly any town is one way I know of getting a little flavour of a past era. The Naseby Cemetery gives a distinct feeling for the gold era, partly from the location of the graves. Protestant families tended to lie in the centre. Out on the edges, the names tended to be Irish and the religion Catholic. But there was also a third group, who I discovered quite by accident. Their graves were on the very edge of the cemetery, hidden in under the trees, perhaps indicating their position in early goldfield society.
It's a little hard to know why the Chinese graves are where they are, right at the very edge of the cemetery, almost over the fence. It's possible because these people were discriminated against. Also possible because they were maybe non-Christians. I actually think they've got the best place in the cemetery, though, under the trees on a hot day like this.
Spent the night close to Naseby Forest. It's a forest of pines from many parts of the world. Corsica, Northern Europe, Monterey and Oregon. Pines seem to grow well here, 700 metres above sea level. The forest begins at an altitude at which most other forests are finishing.
You can identify the Douglas fir by the smell of the crushed leaves. They're very fruity. By the bark of the trunk, sort of like furrowed stretch marks, and by the cones. The cones fall early, they're very soft, and they rot quite easily. I can really identify with the Douglas fir because they come from exactly half a world away, from the state of Oregon on the west coast of the United States. So they should grow well here, and they do. I mean, look at all the seedlings, they're all over the place here. All a Douglas fir seedling needs is the protection of other trees. These ones, no one planted, they're self-seeded on old gold tailings. So no one planted them, no one's pruned them, they've just been left. And there they are, beautiful specimens, straight and round. Well, that's the morning chorus in the pine forest. I heard the saws from through the forest there was having a bit of a look around.
Oh yes, but they always know where Joe Bunting's working.
Joe Bunting, is it?
Yeah.
My name's Peter Hayden,
Yeah,
anyway.
Pleased to meet you, Peter.
Yeah, been travelling through the forest there.
Oh yes, this is my wife Anna.
Pleased to meet you, Peter.
Hello, so you work as a team, do you?
Yes, yeah, husband and wife, and
Oh, really? Oh, that's good. How long has this been
oh,
going
we're
on?
coming up to, this is our 13th year,
Uh-huh.
coming up to it.
Who's the boss?
Oh, don't.
Joe and Anna Bunting weren't cutting big saw logs, but clear felling a small area for poles and fence posts. The trees here seem to take a lot longer to grow than most pines. 37, 38.
About 40 years of age, I estimate this part of the tree anyway. They tell you quite a bit about the climate up here at Naseby, these trees, because their growth rings are quite narrow. So as for a pine, which are reputed to be softwood, these are quite hard. They don't grow much in a year. The light bands, the summer growth, is quite narrow. If this was a tree from the northern part of New Zealand or closer to the coast, it would be a much broader part, because in the summer that's when the tree makes all its growth. Here, and I think because of lack of water, the trees don't grow much in the summer, not much more than they do in the winter when it gets really cold here. So, that's the weather report from Naseby. The
The forest planted by the wind is covering the land laid bare by gold mining.
The main gun at Naseby was not operated by hand, it was operated by some water wheel system and automatically played backwards and forwards against the base of the cliff over there, undercutting it so that great areas would slump down at any one time. And then over there would have been the secondary gun, and that was operated by hand, and the operator would play that over the rocks and debris, causing all the slurry and mess to wash down this way into a system of metal cradles here which had holes in the bottom, and this is where the sorting began. The rocks went that way, and the water and the silt and hopefully the gold out through here and down into the gold catching boxes. They moved tons and tons of earth just to get a few ounces of the yellow stuff, and in doing so the miners, they dramatically changed great areas of Central Otago landscape.
High-pressure sluicing guns were potent agents of change. Hills were halved or flattened, lakes were created where none had been before, and everything apart from gold and big rocks disappeared downriver, creating major ecological problems.
I feel like a fish in a sludge channel. Dust in my gills and all over my food. Thanks very much.
The rivers that carried the silt were called sludge channels, and I journeyed down one of them. It's odd that the Kyburn or Cow Stream is still a sludge channel. It's now 100 years since the sluicing. It also seems rather odd to discover a black-backed gull colony so far from the coast, but then these highly successful birds will even nest on mountaintops. Latitude 45 passes across the Maniatoto, the Plain of Blood. The Scottish surveyor Thompson wanted to use the original Maori names for local features, but his superior said no, so we gave all the creeks Scottish names. Maybe the animal names for all the creeks were Thompson's subtle revenge.
I wouldn't call them a pretty bird. In fact, that yellow skin over their face makes them look more like a sort of jaundiced turkey. The spurwing plovers are quite new to New Zealand. I'm not quite sure if they've colonised the whole country yet, but I think they've covered most of it. Well, considering they were only seen in Southland for the first time about 50 years ago, they're doing particularly well. I don't see any chicks out there, but the spurwings get their chicks away at a fairly early stage, so I wouldn't expect to see any just now. They're probably family groups out there now. They should be quite a popular bird because they eat insects and harmful larvae that are found in the pasture, but it's that cackling noise they make which stops them from being a lot more popular. It really gets on your nerves. A lot of New Zealand bird life comes from Australia, so I suppose you could call those birds rowdy Australians.
Westerly winds often bring Aussie overstayers to Central Otago, and occasionally the lakes and dams on this plain attract some rare Australian visitors. They must be an inviting stopover for tired birds that have been swept across the Tasman. A climate similar to parts of the Australian interior, and the lakes form a system of billabongs, places that Aussie birds like to stay near. The only visitors from overseas that I saw were ones that have been here so long that they're now true blue New Zealanders. The pukeko, or swamp hen, is a rail which came through Australia. Rails are good at spreading from island to island. The pukeko, being a very socially aware species, is always good to watch. The group was quite unaware of my presence, and I was able to watch their comings and goings in an area which seemed to include a number of territories. They use their red frontal plate as a flag of aggression, and their fluffy white bottoms for appeasement.
That's very interesting and entertaining. Oh, this is what all well-dressed bird watchers are wearing this year. Designer camouflage nets. I've met quite a few people on the road. Seen quite a few things from the roadside. But I think the place I know best is the roadside itself, or as I call it, the long acre. It's a place where weeds can escape to from the farmer's paddock, make seed and re-invade the pasture. It's a second home for grasses and for wildflowers. It's a unique landscape. I love it. And at this time of year, it's all happening.
At one time, the Maniatoto wasn't a plain of blood, but a plain of water. The trees were preserved where they fell, in bogs and swamps beside large lakes. At Idaburn, 15-million-year-old trees are still preserved in a thick layer of brown lignite coal. The trees that warm us today grew when Latitude 45 South had a climate more like the tropics. Samples have shown them to be of species not seen since before the ice ages. Pieces of palm tree, eucalypt, casuarina and broadleaf beech and others fill the coal seam at Idaburn.
Those first New Zealanders who came up into this district, I wonder what track they took. I doubt if they would have walked along where the main road goes now. It'd be far too swampy down there. They probably took the route that I've got up here along by the railway track. It would have been a lot easier going, and they kept close to the hill. It would have been a much better track. It would have been forested, of course, but less dense.
The first settlers on the 45th parallel weren't very settled. They travelled far in search of food. And they probably wore gaiters of cabbage tree leaves to protect their legs against speargrass and matagalli.
I doubt if the family that ate lunch here 1,000 years ago would have had ham sandwiches like I had. They would have had meat, however, probably preserved in its own fat, something like moa or weka or native quail. But they would have brought other foods here towards the district, and they would have carried them in packs made of supplejack and flax. They would also brought with them things like roasted fern root, raupo pollen cakes, lengths of cabbage tree, and it would have all been washed down with a nutritious drink made of tutu juice. I suppose canned drinks are a little more reliable. The drinkers of the tutu juice would have had to be a little bit careful, because if they didn't strain it properly and they got any bits of seed in it, it could make it a very poisonous sort of drink.
My journey began over in whitestone or limestone country, but this was hardstone, and it attracted the first New Zealanders.
This is what they came here for. Very hard quartzite rock. In fact, this looks like it might have been struck from a larger piece, maybe 900 years ago. It's certainly got some very sharp edges to it to make a good blade. Now, they obviously rejected that piece. Now maybe I'm kidding myself, but I imagine that this area here has been dug out. It's different from the surrounding land anyway. Lots of broken rocks around it. Now, this could have been part of an old factory, because a lot of activities went on here. The rock was quarried, the coarse rocks were broken open, and then fine work was done in other places as well. It was a whole lot of different little work areas. It's very difficult to know what went on here. It's about as obvious as the vast moa hunter site at the mouth of the Waitaki River. Still, it is a privilege and a slightly strange feeling about visiting an old factory like this.
Oturehua's reputation as a centre for light industry didn't finish with the stone tools. This small rural community has also produced metal tools, which have profoundly altered the New Zealand landscape. The permanent wire strainer and the very successful parallel wire strainer were the inventions of Ernest Hayes, a flour miller turned engineer here at the beginning of the century. His wife Hannah Hayes travelled hundreds of kilometres by pushbike promoting their products, as did their motorcycling son from their Oturehua factory.
I was wondering if you could tell me where Hayes Engineering is.
Yeah, I just came from down that way. It's, just keep going and you'll see the bridge down there.
Yep.
And just cross that, and then there's a sign, and you'll see, and just turn to your right and go up that road, and you'll see all those buildings there.
Okay, well, I'll have a good look when I go along the road.
I hope you enjoy your wee outing there.
Oh, well, how far are you
nice
going?
sunny day. Oh, I'm just going up the road a wee bit, and just on the bike, just try and keep fit.
Oh, that's the way.
I do that every day.
Do you?
Yeah.
Oh, good one.
Yeah.
Thanks
Good
very
goal.
much.
That's
See you
okay.
later.
See you around then. Good out. Terry.
The original Hayes factory was powered by the largest windmill in New Zealand, but in later years they converted to water power. Water drove the pulleys that powered the machines that made the tools that the farmers wanted. Hayes Industries moved to the city many years ago, but the old factory remains as a working museum in the district, which to me is our industrial heartland. They even have an official plaque, unlike the industrial sites of earlier times I've seen. The Moa hunters at Oturehua 900 years ago used their adze-making skills brought from Polynesia to make hand blades needed in this new land. Similarly, the Hayes family used existing technology to invent objects needed by the farmers of their day. There are still many Hayes windmills pumping water onto the thirsty land along Latitude 45 South. This morning, I was allowed to cross private property and rejoin the railway close to my line.
Following the trail of the early Moa hunters.
Have you found any?
No, not yet. No, but they would have kept going along just up here off the plain, because down there where the road is would have been a bit too swampy for them, I think, anyway.
Yeah.
'Cause they used to come through this way about 1,000 years ago. Oh, I didn't expect any traffic here. There's not too many trains up here today, is there?
Oh, just a couple.
One a day,
What time?
one a night.
Oh, at night.
10:30.
Oh, well, I should be all right then.
I think you might be able to make it.
Yeah. Where are you heading?
We're going down to a Oturehua.
Oh, yeah.
And then we're coming back again, and that's where we're working on just down here.
Oh, I'll try not to meet you on a bridge.
As there was only one train at night, I followed the tunnels and viaducts through the gorge from the Ida Valley to the Manuherikia. It saved considerable time and effort to go through the hill rather than over the top.
I see possums are doing fairly well even up here. Well, maybe not these ones, perhaps. They must have been coming through the tunnel when the train came. They're nocturnal, you see. They're marsupials. You can see the pouch even on this one. They were bought from Australia to start a fur industry in New Zealand. You'd never know from this one, though. And like many other animals, once they got to New Zealand, they took off.
I have passed through a block of land that's been pushed up and tilted. Ahead and behind me are similar blocks, separated by broad valleys. I'm literally smack in the middle of my journey, and smack in the middle of the Central Otago block and basin landscape. If there's such a thing as continental New Zealand, then this is it.
Oh no. This is nothing like what these clouds are like. They're very subtle clouds. I don't think I'll try and sketch clouds again. They've got an outline, but as soon as you draw the outline, it's too much. Very subtle. They keep changing too. I don't think these clouds would be much use to anyone. They look more like some sort of creeping disease. But I felt I had to attempt to draw the clouds on this veranda in the township of Ophir, because this was the home and the weather recording station of one of the most keen observers of nature in Central Otago, the Reverend Alexander Don. He kept the weather here when he retired.
Alec Don was a Presbyterian minister, a Chinese missionary, an interpreter and friend to many Chinese on the goldfields. He made his observations of nature when walking the great distances between the gold mining communities, and later he put his same thoroughness of approach to work in his weather recordings. His cloud sketches were even less subtle than mine, but they did give head office a clear idea of conditions at the midpoint of Latitude 45 South. He even related the climate to the growth of flowers in the gardens around Ophir.
There have been a lot colder days since the Reverend Don was taking the temperatures here. In fact, I think it was 1943. Ophir claimed the official low for a temperature ever recorded in New Zealand at minus 20 degrees centigrade. But as the locals hereabouts are at pains to point out, there's a lot colder places in New Zealand. It's just that this is the coldest place they keep official temperatures.
The owners of the local pub still keep the weather recordings at Ophir 50 years later. And down the road at Lauder is probably another legacy of the Reverend Don's work. He recorded the large number of clear nights which the DSIR now take advantage of to study the upper atmosphere. 50 years ago, he used his eyes and thermometer, a pencil and sketchbook for recording the weather.
Hold it. Elevation anti-clockwise.
Now they record the amounts of barely traceable nitrogen gases present in the upper
That's it,
atmosphere
thank you.
to help a worldwide understanding of the ozone layer. The last block on this part of the journey is the Dunstan Range. And as it was 1,500 metres high, I gladly accepted the ride to the top offered by Robert Job. They run a merino stud on Muteri Station. Originally from Spain, these Latitude 45 Northerners are so hardy, someone told me they can almost live off the view.
Keep out tune!
Got any other sheep do as well up here, towards the tops?
Oh yes, I think on this developed country a lot of sheep would do pretty well, but I don't think anything would produce the income that merinos do, certainly at the moment.
Now, I've seen a few of them around. Is there a bit of a movement towards merinos at the present?
Yes, there is a bit of swing back towards merinos, largely because of the wool returns from them. Possibly a bit of dissatisfaction with the meat industry at the moment.
We looked at a pocket of mountain totara trees that they were conserving. They would have been among the trees that once clothed the mid-slopes of most of the Central Otago Block Mountains before being burned. Unlike their tall forest relatives, mountain totara are big shrubs, but certainly they're the tallest plants at this altitude. Above them are only tussock grasslands, and above that the alpine herbs and flowers. Few people ever see New Zealand's flower garden, which conceals itself high in our mountains. Some blooms have relatives in the home garden, but others are known nowhere else in the world.
And again, I've missed out. And I come to these places, I'm either too early or too late. The flowering's over by the look of it. Like these daisies here, they've been pollinated, they've set their seed. They looked good a few weeks ago, but they're long gone now. What a shame. Never mind. Oh well, at least the grasshoppers are still around.
Mountain grasshoppers are the main natural grazers up here, and later in the summer when the Jops bring their merinos up, they'll only be getting grasshopper leftovers. As I climbed, I had the impression that some plants were being slowly but surely squashed. The solar fluxion terraces are the result of waterlogged soil slowly creeping downhill like thick custard. The movement is gradual and happens at a time of year when the ground isn't frozen. It's hard to talk about the mountains of Central Otago as having summits. The broad, flat tops have a scattering of what from a distance appear to be slightly higher bits. It's only up close that one realises the size of these Stonehenge tors.
Well, the reason why these huge lumps of rock are in the landscape is that they must have been a lot harder than the surrounding rock, which has been chipped away at by nature like some sort of giant sculptor to produce these magnificent rock tors. Well, there's where the wind's been having a bit of a go at carving. Oh, it's cold. But the wind, picking up bits of sand and gravel, comes swooping along low to the ground and effectively sandblasts the face of these rocks. The ice carves these tors quite differently. When water gets down in these cracks, which it does from time to time, and then freezes, it expands. And as anyone knows who's left bottles too long in the deep freeze, what happens is the bottle shatters, and so does the rock up here on the tors. So that's how they do their carving. Oh, and there's one other agent that carves the tors, the lichen. The lichen is a mixture between an alga and a fungus, and the fungus part of this happy relationship ever so slowly dissolves the rock. So this is the alpine forest, a forest where the trees have been growing for hundreds of years. Though you hardly know it to look at them. If you can't see these forest giants, don't worry. It's because they grow horizontally, they keep a low profile, and hardly blame them. Now here's the massive great trunk of the forest giant, the lower branches, upper branches and foliage out here. They're called Dracophyllum, they're in the heath family, actually related to the rhododendrons. Well, despite the cold wind, I still like coming to places like this. The mountain tops like this are so contrasting. There's a contrast between tiny flowers and huge rocks. The contrast between vaulting heavens and forests that grow no higher than your bootlaces.
In the tor statues, the land and the climate become joined as one. And below, tucked away in valleys, I found statues which link us to the land. Stamping batteries were hauled up here bit by bit. Sometimes they were moved from goldfield to goldfield and left behind when gold and effort ran out.
Very hard rock quartz. I call it the rock of Central Otago. It's the rock that's had a lot to do with human activity here. And the miners, for the first time, would have had to go looking for it. So up the back here, I guess they would have driven reefs into the hill. They would have sunk shafts into the ground to haul the quartz, which hopefully contained the gold, out of the ground, trundled it along the track up the back here, and then dropped it down a hopper, which is no longer here, mixed with water, down to the feet of the stompers here. There's actually a foot that's missing, that's dropped off there. So once it had got the undivided attention of the stompers, the water, the gravel, and hopefully the gold would have shot out the bottom to be dealt with in much the same way as the sluice material was.
The monument had its little guardians. There were lots of little skinks out basking on the warm rocks. But the schist landscape has also been home for some of our biggest and rarest lizards. Otagense takes its name from this part of Latitude 45 South.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 times...
I'm getting too tired, I can't remember, but that's a long way down. These hillsides are honeycombed with huge shafts and great drives.
People went to an enormous amount of trouble. The deep shaft was something like 130 metres. I made my final camp on the stage here at Bendigo, so named because many miners came here from the depleted fields of Bendigo, Australia. As well as the whole hillside being riddled with very deep holes, there were hundreds of small ones as well. The guardians of the ruins at Bendigo weren't lizards, but a very successful introduced animal. And as my day and journey ended, they seemed to be just getting going. At one time, spreading waves of rabbits reduced much land near here to desert. They were controlled for many years, but again the rabbits have become a problem in a few valleys. I think it's unlikely that they will ever again swarm all along the 45th parallel. Most land hereabouts is too well farmed to suit them.
I've seen a lot on this part of the trip. It's been a wearying amount, actually. Well, the goal I set myself is the river. Well, it's within view. It's a couple of kilometres away. The thing about Central Otago, I guess, has been heat. The next stage of the journey is a lot more hills and a lot more water.